Today was supposed to be our honeymoon, but just as we finished packing and were about to leave, my husband did something shocking. He tore up my passport right in front of me. His smug expression annoyed me. I never wanted to go on this trip with him in the first place. I had planned to go with my mom. Before we got married, I sensed some tension, but I had no idea how deep the issues were between my husband and his mother. I've never heard of a mother-in-law taking over someone's honeymoon like this, at least not in my circle of friends. I was shocked, angry, and creeped out by the situation. As my husband began shredding my passport with scissors, I looked at my grinning mother-in-law and knew I had to escape as soon as possible. I never expected this, but I had evidence that could expose them. My name is Sarah. I'm 29, and I've been working for 7 years. Recently, my boyfriend of 4 years proposed, and now we're planning our wedding and honeymoon. I met my husband at work, where he was a senior while I was new. He always supported me. When I struggled with new tasks at work, the only person I had dated before was a classmate. But there was something about someone 5 years older. I found my husband dependable and trustworthy. When he asked me out on our first date, I was thrilled. I still treasure the dolphin figurine we bought at the aquarium on that date. He mentioned wanting a serious relationship leading to marriage, and I was elated. We went on many dates, and he proposed to me at the same aquarium where we had our first date. Can I really be this happy? That night, I was so excited that I couldn't sleep. I still remember that feeling of pure joy, like my head was in the clouds. Soon after, we visited his parents' home. However, I started feeling uneasy about marriage there. My father-in-law was kind, but my mother-in-law seemed disapproving. She even commented that he could have married someone more impressive than me, which filled me with doubt and anxiety. Despite this, I tried to brush off my concerns as pre-wedding jitters and continued with the wedding plans. During our discussions about married life, both my husband and his mother assumed I would quit my job. Although I once liked the idea of leaving work after marriage, it didn't seem right anymore. Despite my mother-in-law's persistent suggestions to quit, I decided to keep working at the same company alongside my husband. We disagreed on when to officially register our marriage. He wanted to do it sooner, but we compromised and registered shortly after. Although the procedure was mundane, realizing we were officially married brought me immense happiness. We also discussed having a small, intimate wedding. It sounds like your mother-in-law took over a lot of your wedding planning, insisting on a grand affair instead of the small, intimate ceremony you envisioned. She not only dictated the guest list, but also had strong opinions about every detail, from the program to the decorations and food. This led to the wedding becoming much more extravagant and expensive than you had planned, and you ended up having to cover the extra costs. After the wedding, you hoped for some distance from your mother-in-law, but your husband insisted on living with her, canceling your new place without consulting you. This left you feeling shocked and unheard. The stress from the wedding planning and now these living arrangements added to your anxiety. Despite these tensions, you were looking forward to your honeymoon abroad, a dream destination you had always wanted to visit. However, your husband's suspicious behavior and the prospect of returning to live with your mother-in-law after the trip made you feel uneasy. Unfortunately, your husband wasn't helpful in planning the honeymoon either, adding to your growing concerns. It's clear that your husband took charge of booking the flights and hotels for your honeymoon, which initially seemed helpful given the excitement surrounding the wedding. However, this turned out to be a foreshadowing of something shocking to come. On the day of your honeymoon, as you were preparing for your flight, Edward casually dropped the bombshell that he would be going on the trip with his mother instead of you. This was incredibly confusing and upsetting, especially since you had paid for everything and were expecting to go together as newlyweds. Edward then tore up your passport, which you had given him for safekeeping. Without any regard for your plans or feelings, it became clear that he never intended to go on the honeymoon with you and viewed it as a secondary priority compared to a trip with his mother. When his fully made-up mother-in-law burst into the room, they both laughed gleefully at leaving you behind. This revelation left you feeling repulsed and realizing that you had made a grave mistake marrying someone who disregarded your feelings so callously. This shocking turn of events made you realize the true nature of your husband and mother-in-law, and you were left feeling betrayed and deeply disappointed. It's devastating to realize that your husband had planned to go on the honeymoon with his mother all along, using the preparations as a guise to prepare for their trip. He booked everything under his mother's name and left you with all the costs. This betrayal deeply hurt you, overshadowing any initial happiness you felt about his involvement in planning. The dreamy wedding and honeymoon you had envisioned were ruined by the interference of your mother-in-law and your husband's deceit. Overwhelmed by this situation, you initially couldn't accept it, but soon decided that you needed to act quickly and pursue a divorce. Interestingly, you had been recording audio since the wedding preparations began, initially to preserve memories, but later to document your mother-in-law's troubling behavior. These recordings unexpectedly became crucial evidence for your divorce. As you began packing to leave the house, you discovered shocking evidence that your husband was embezzling money from his company. This revelation added another layer of deceit to an already painful situation, strengthening your resolve to leave and end the marriage. It's devastating to realize that your husband and mother-in-law betrayed you, turning what should have been joyful events like your wedding and honeymoon into painful experiences. Edward's deception hit you hard, especially since you were initially grateful for his help with the honeymoon preparations, only to find out he was planning to go with his mother all along. Edward booked everything under his mother's name and left you with the financial burden, which added to your feelings of betrayal and anger. The dream wedding and honeymoon you had imagined were shattered by their actions. Feeling overwhelmed and hurt, you decided that getting a divorce was the best course of action. Interestingly, you had been recording moments since the wedding preparations began, originally to preserve memories. Over time, these recordings became crucial evidence documenting your mother-in-law's malicious behavior and harassment, which would support your decision to seek a divorce. Despite the pain, you found solace in knowing that these recordings would serve a purpose beyond preserving memories. It's ironic how those recordings became so useful. Just a few days after moving in, I began repacking my belongings, realizing I hadn't opened much since arriving. I wondered if my husband and his mother were already at the airport, which filled me with indescribable anger. Despite only being there a short time, I wanted to erase any trace of my presence, so I thoroughly cleaned everywhere I had been. While cleaning the living room, I stumbled upon shocking evidence of my husband's embezzlement from his company. I immediately called my uncle and recounted everything that had happened. He became visibly enraged, which was an expression I had never seen on him before. I shared the details of my husband's embezzlement and handed over the evidence. My uncle promised to convene a board meeting to address my husband's actions. Before heading back home, my uncle insisted on grabbing some good food together. Despite the unbelievable betrayal of having my honeymoon hijacked, I felt genuinely grateful knowing there were still warm-hearted people in my life who cared for me. A week later, when my husband and his mother returned from what was supposed to be our honeymoon, I had already taken decisive steps to address the situation and seek support from trusted family members. I got a call from my husband, who was furious that I hadn't picked them up from the airport or cleaned the house as he instructed. He yelled at me, demanding to know where I was. With support from my uncle and parents, I had already hired a skilled lawyer who specialized in divorce cases, and the process was underway. Without giving my husband a chance to speak, I told him I didn't want to hear their voices anymore. I questioned why I should pick up someone I'm divorcing, and why I should follow their orders to clean. This left him momentarily speechless, but he quickly resumed his angry ranting. He tried to guilt me by saying he had done me a favor by marrying me and threatened that I would never get remarried if he divorced me. He even had the audacity to demand that I come back and prepare meals for them in a traditional way because they were tired of foreign food. His disrespectful behavior, especially after his scheme with the passport and trip with his mother, made me realize I had never truly known him. Reflecting on this over the past few days, I decided to consult a lawyer about our divorce. When I mentioned the divorce to him, he was shocked and refused to accept it, claiming he wouldn't get a divorce. I could hear his mother in the background, yelling and calling me names. I calmly informed him that I had reported his embezzlement to his company, and they would likely be contacting him soon. I suggested he get his own lawyer and ended the call, sensing his panic on the other end. It wasn't my problem anymore. My husband kept calling, so I simply blocked his number. My uncle knew our honeymoon dates, so right after our conversation, the company summoned my husband based on the evidence I provided. During the meeting, they verified the information and confirmed significant discrepancies in payments. It turned out that the amount my husband embezzled was substantial. In front of the company executives, my husband desperately tried to defend himself by fabricating a story, accusing me of the embezzlement. However, my uncle intervened, stating loudly that I would never do such a thing. They made it clear that my husband and his mother were responsible for the embezzlement, and they were fortunate that the police had not been involved yet. Realizing that the situation was dire and that I was related to senior management, my husband looked defeated. That day, I went to return the wedding gifts to my colleagues since our marriage had ended so abruptly. However, everyone refused, stating that they had given the gifts as a gesture of goodwill. During this interaction, my husband approached me, expressing surprise that I was related to senior management and pleading for forgiveness. He asked if I could persuade my uncle to let him stay at the company and make the embezzlement charges go away. Disgusted by his audacity, I firmly told him that divorce was the only option now, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions. Ignoring my words, he desperately clung on, but my colleagues intervened, and security eventually escorted him away. He was immediately fired from the company, and they are seeking damages for the embezzlement. Afterward, my mother-in-law repeatedly tried to contact my family, likely seeking to meddle further. After consulting with my sensible father-in-law, the calls from my mother-in-law stopped. Initially, he had believed that she was going on a domestic trip with friends and was looking forward to a peaceful week without her constant demands. He later apologized to me, admitting his mistake. Understanding my situation, my father-in-law agreed that I should return to my parents' home and helped me pack. Despite our emotions being high at the time, I went back to my family knowing he was the only reasonable person I could trust in that house. Feeling embarrassed about how my honeymoon was hijacked, I considered resigning from my job. However, my uncle and CEO arranged for me to be transferred to a different office, which helped distract me from the situation. The divorce process with my husband went smoothly thanks to an excellent lawyer. Later, I learned that my father-in-law was involved in planning our wedding and realized my husband had no savings. To cover the substantial alimony, my father-in-law had to sell their family home. Due to rumors and gossip in the neighborhood about my canceled honeymoon, living there became unbearable. My mother-in-law likely couldn't bear the scrutiny, and my father-in-law felt responsible for covering the damages caused by my husband's actions. After being fired and facing damages, my husband suffered a breakdown and moved to a small apartment. Seeing her son distressed, my mother-in-law also became reclusive. My father-in-law, tired of her behavior, considered divorce and asked for help from the lawyer I used. Thanks to the CEO and my uncle, I was transferred to a supportive branch office. I am grateful for their intervention and support. My only regret is missing out on the honeymoon destination we planned. Once things settle down, I hope to take a relaxed trip abroad and move forward from this difficult chapter in my life.